Hi, everybody. Welcome to the AOGP Season 3, Podcast Number 1. Our guest is Eddie Cairo. Eddie is a staff member here at AOGP and a wise old soul when it comes to some of the background information that Scientology came from. What we're going to do with these podcasts is these are going to be new podcasts for new people and old. What we're going to do is we're going to try and have 2 podcasts a week, and we'll go into all kinds of cool subjects and get into some really great discussions, things that have never been said, things that have never been discussed before on the internet or in a podcast about Scientology or Independent Scientology. We are independent Scientologists, and we'll also try and clear up a lot of the definitions as we go along. So let's get started here. Eddie, thanks for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. So first, we want to clear up some definitions about the roots of Scientology and go over some of these more esoteric definitions. Let's go ahead and start off with our first definition here that you want to clear up before we get started.
Okay. And the first one is, yes, right hand and left hand path, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
So what is the right hand and left hand path?
All right. So broadly speaking, it's hard to define these things without getting into the history. We will do that, but I'll try to just give a brief overview first. The 2 paths are basically how one distinguishes the traditional practice of things like magic and what we are calling Western esotericism. I will define that next, but basically, it is a differentiation in how one practices. The right-hand path are things, or constitutes things, and the practice of magic, and the more difficult to understand and arcane schools of thought, which also fall in line very much with the society in which they exist and the culture that they sprung up in, and it's in line with traditionalist values and morals to a degree. But the main thing is that it has a collectivist focus instead of an individualist focus. Mm-hmm. So that's the most basic definition I can give.
Okay.
And as opposed to left-hand path, which would be the opposite of that, they are all about breaking taboos and see breaking taboos as a necessary step in deprogramming oneself from the cultural stuff we've got going on and these hang-ups and these circuits, just all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And that is something called liberation theology, which gets into how to liberate oneself from the confines of which the morals of society we have been brought up in. Mm-hmm. So their approach is generally more on the individual and sees individual spiritual freedom as the most important thing.
Okay. So give me an example of what a right-hand path would be.
Okay. So right-hand path and left-hand path, they are muddied definitions, and esotericists these days, some of them totally reject both those terms. But I guess for right-hand path, if I was to give a totally just cut and dry example, those would be very, very organized, magical, and Delphic sects, like with the T. Mm-hmm. Those are the organizations that you kind of think of when you think of these ceremonial magicians and spiritual think tanks. They're people who have a very set structure and they have a very strict code of morals. So they're more in line with what we would traditionally think of as a religion with very strict doctrine and dogma to an extent. I guess the best example I can give that people might know about is Wicca. Mm-hmm. Wicca is an example, but that is the type that focuses almost entirely on ceremonial magic, mm-hmm. as opposed to philosophy and deeper, more thoughtful practices. Like, I do not want to disparage any Wiccans by calling it low magic or something like that, but that is a debate that happens within those communities.
Okay. So left-hand path.
Okay, so left-hand path. Now, oddly enough, I think that Crowley probably rejected the label of left-hand path, but these days, that is certainly the thing that is assigned, the label that is assigned to Thelema and the OTO and anything that has an element of shock value in it. Like the Anton LaVey is not a ceremonial magician at all, but he was influenced by Crowley and is strictly a philosopher. That's strictly a philosophy, but it is a left-hand path philosophy. And so is, Luciferianism, theistic Satanism, and we'll get more into that, what those sort of things mean too. But like anything that breaks taboos, and they're not literally worshiping Satan in the strictest, most Abrahamic sense. They're essentially either having a different take on the stories and descriptions and scriptures of the Bible and the Gospels, some that most review as extremely heretical. And like I said, they do that in order to free oneself of what they see as just manipulative lies that have been put out there. So that's just part of it. One of the big tenets of left-hand path philosophy is that you need to experience a form of ego death, and in order to do that, you need to break free wholly of any cultural programming that has happened.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that one of the differences between the right-hand and the left-hand path definitions would be the right-hand path is, in quotes, more conservative than a left-hand path?
Right, definitely. And, you can use those terms very loosely because, as in this country, we might think of liberals and conservatives a certain type of way, but even that is not wholly descriptive. It really just depends on the culture you're growing up in. And because cultures vary, so will right-hand and left-hand path ideas about morals. What could be considered taboo here might be considered totally okay and in line and somewhere like India. It might be just completely different.
So would it be safe to say that from 1950 on with Scientology or independent Scientology as we practice it, that Scientology would be, would you say that it's more of a right-hand path or a left-hand path?
Well, the thing about left-hand and right-hand path is that I cannot really think of many pure examples of those two. I mean, those examples that I gave, they have a degree of I don't know what you want to call it, baggage behind it,
right? Just
because that's the nature of this thing. But most forms of esotericism have elements of both left and right-hand path, and left-hand path does by no means mean or indicate evil or satanic influences in the way we might think of that. It just really is the strict differentiation is the goal of the practitioner. Are they focusing on bettering themselves primarily or their community? That would be the difference. So most ideologies, including Scientology, pull from both.
Okay.
And usually the analogy I use is that people generally, they have one dominant hand. People are usually right-handed or left-handed, but they will use both. Now, some people only have use of one hand or only have one hand or whatever, but some people are ambidextrous. And the same goes for right and left-hand path. Most practice a degree of both. Another differentiation I could give is that right-hand path people are usually quite ascetic and restrictive and don't do things that are going to raise their dopamine. It's closer to a monastic lifestyle, whereas left-hand path people are generally more indulgent, and they do not permit allowing oneself to get into an addiction of anything. But they are usually more okay, or even consider it to be an integral part of their philosophy and their doctrine and their religion to explore those things. And that could be anything from like a right-hand path person might meditate to achieve enlightenment and get closer to what they would consider their form of nirvana, whereas a left-hand path person might do things that would keep them out. They will be dancing around, they'll be singing, they'll be expressing themselves. So that's sort of the difference. One is, in the non-political sense, yes, more conservative, and the other is more expressive.
Right. Okay, good.
And so, sorry to interrupt, but your question about Scientology, I would say that it is both.
Okay, thank you. So next definition we've got, let's see here. We've got mystery schools.
Okay. So I'm going to try to define mystery schools and mysteries separately because there is a distinction there. But the mystery schools are a set of ideas and organized. A lot of them reject the term religion, but I'm using this strictly in a scholarly sort of academic sense because that's what it is. Mystery schools are secret societies, religions, philosophical organizations that teach these very, very difficult to grasp concepts, these sort of secret hidden truths or whatever.
Would it be safe to say that by definition alone, Scientology, from a scholarly standpoint, could be considered a mystery school?
Very much so. Yes, I would say that it is. Another term that is used, and I'm not entirely sure if that was one of the words we're going to clear or not, but Western esotericism is the other way people might describe these things. A third, or actually there might be four. Someone might say Western mysticism, or someone might say, and this is the one that is generally used in the most neutral sense these days, Western mystery tradition. And all that Western mystery tradition is a type of religious structure where enlightenment is incremental, and there are very clear set out pathways that you build upon, because the person at the bottom is not ready for the stuff at the top. It's too intense.
Right. Well, that exactly describes Scientology grade chart.
Right, it does. And so that's definitely, I think, an influence, as far as I know, that LRH had.
And we'll get into that more later as to what the makeup of these earlier mystery schools were, and how they've had an effect on Scientology and why.
Right.
Okay, next we got, let's see here, esotericism in general.
Okay, and there's a difference here because clearing words, you got to clear all definitions. Capital E esotericism in a lot of contexts is different than lowercase e esotericism. And capital E esotericism basically means these third ways of thinking that have emerged out of Western culture. And by Western culture, I do not just mean Europe. I mean anything that has come in or around where Arabic and Abrahamic and that sort of thing, those sorts of religions have mainly thrived in their early days. So it's not just Europe. It also comes from the Near East and the Middle East.
Right. So give me an example of esotericism specifically.
Okay. Well, I think some history that is needed here is generally how people think about Western esotericism. For people who are in the know, either from direct involvement or from independent research or scholars, they might know that Western esotericism, or whatever you want to call it, is seen as the, quote, third way of thinking in Western philosophy, basically. Mm-hmm. How, we have the traditional Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian, whatever, the orthodoxies that we built our society upon. Those are one way of thinking. And then we have, of course, the sort of irreligion, the Enlightenment era, rationalism, this strict secular view of the world. But what most people don't know is that those were not the only two ways of thinking to come out of Europe, and even discounting paganism, if you want to call that a traditional religion. This does pull from it a little bit sometimes. What Western esotericism is a third way of thinking, and it is hard to define, much like its definition itself, meaning hard to understand. Mm-hmm. It is really difficult to pin down, because that's kind of the point. I don't know if we want to get into all that right now, that in order to survive because of persecution of the various churches in Europe during and around the Dark Ages, they had to partially hide their stuff, and even more mystery than they already had. Mm-hmm. That's just sort of what's come of this, and this is just one reason that it is so mysterious. But it definitely sometimes serves as a filter, so that people who think in very easily radicalized and extremist ways will not go very far. Mm-hmm. You have to expand your consciousness. It's very, very similar to what has come out of the East in terms of Buddhism and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So the other definition of esotericism, I hope that answered the question.
Well, the question I had, as you said, is there was a third way. What would the first and the second way be again?
Well, I like I was talking about, those are the traditional religious orthodoxies we have, like hard line religion. I mean, on faith alone type of religion, mm-hmm. and that orthodox sort of puritanical, just these are the way we think, these are the way we do, mm-hmm. that sort of thing.
Like what?
Well, like Christianity, like state churches having been a thing mm-hmm. in many, many countries, and still are, but they don't have quite as much influences. But many, many countries in Europe were theocracies. Wow. So those would be one way. That's one way of thinking, is the traditionalist religious way. The other is the irreligious way, is the strictly rational. If I cannot prove it directly with the scientific method, if it's not visible, then it's not true, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, those are the two. Mm-hmm. And so esotericism is the third. Yes.
Okay.
Good. So lowercase e esotericism just means anything that is either not intended to or is inherently hard to understand by most of the population, or without a great deal of training in that particular area.
Okay. Gnosticism.
Gnosticism is something that goes back very, very far, and we'll get more into that in the second part of this, because mm-hmm. this is an ancient religion, and maybe we'll have time to talk about this at the end. I'm hoping we will, this one. But this goes back to the early, and I mean earliest, Christian viewpoint. This is back when Christianity was considered a cult. Like, it was rejected wholesale.
Right.
And since there was no orthodoxy, there was no central body that was the Christian church, people had wildly different interpretations of the scriptures and of the Bible. And these would be ideas. Gnosticism shares a few characteristics, and generally it is from an Abrahamic origin, mostly Christian, but not always. And they have different ideas than we are used to in the modern day about what has occurred in the story of the Bible. And that usually you see a few different things. You'll see they believe that the Old Testament had a God that was different than the New Testament God, and the God in the Old Testament was an evil, narcissistic, vindictive guy. Some even believe he was what now we would refer to as an extraterrestrial who trapped people in physical bodies because the physical world is fucked up. Excuse my French, but that is the general take that people have in Gnosticism, that the material world is totally messed up. It's just awful. It's just, we got crime and cruelty and it's just bad. But that the spiritual world is pure, and that would be darkness and light. And so the God in the Old Testament, he was the bad one. He was the demiurge, as they call him, and the God in the New Testament, because the tone changes between those two books. But the God in the New Testament is the one who is the creator of the universe, and he is benevolent and omnipresent. And there is some variation as to whether or not they thought Jesus actually existed in a physical form, or that maybe it was a parable, or that it is strictly a spiritual thing, or he was an apparition. Right. These are the kinds of characteristics that Gnosticism shares.
And so Gnosticism is more of a general term for these types of things, in other words.
Right. It is, because the people who were writing about the Gnostics during this time, they were not scholars. They were not coming at it from a neutral perspective. They were writing what we would call polemics. And polemics are they're hit pieces, basically. They are arguments against. And that's something we see in Scientology as well, where there is very, very little neutral literature on it.
Right, usually derogatory.
Yes, and the same thing was happening. And these would come either from people who were never involved or who were apostates. And any religious scholar will tell you those don't age well. Those are not reliable sources when you're trying to document something that might not be the way they knew it, or might not be at all in a couple hundred or 1,000 years.
Right.
So that is a problem that is presented. This is just a broad label that has been assigned to this heterodox, meaning the opposite of orthodox, view of Christianity and the Bible, and sometimes Judaism, and even some things that have branched out from there.
So in other words, the Catholic religion at some point, and almost any of the major world religions, all suffered from the same growing pains that we see with the subject of Scientology, as far as the hit pieces and being cults and all of that stuff, until they gained a popular light with the mass.
Yes, this is something that you see in every single religion in history. They are all considered cults. They are all something that threatens the establishment. They are usually boxed into a more acceptable narrative. It's usually changed a lot. And there's usually some political motivation for there only being one
That's what I was going to say. As to what happened with Christianity in the Roman Empire,
yes,
for example, is it was corporatized, if you will.
Right, it was. And they had such a problem with Christianity. It was such, I guess, what we would call a cult now to them, which the old definition of that word is very different than the way it is used today, which just meant a segment of a well-established religious practice within a culture. Mm-hmm. But here's the funny little joke. It's actually quite nerdy that religious scholars have, is that a religion is a cult plus time, because they don't even use words like that. Yeah, no. It's a slippery definition. It's mostly pejorative and an assessment of quality, and there's no objectivity to it. So it is thrown out because it's unhelpful. But the very same ideas that we have about that sort of thing, this just pejorative thought about anything new being inherently bad, mm-hmm. that was existent in Rome in ancient times. I mean, Christians were fed to lions. Right. We know about that. And until a Roman emperor finally embraced Christianity for political reasons and could have control over it, mm-hmm. It was rejected. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is speculation. We don't have a lot on this, but it is quite possible that was because, in part, that there was so much variation, and it is harder to control people when they have wildly different views on their own religion.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, once it was codified, yes. better. The more popular, the more stable it was, and it wasn't just an oral tradition; it was a written tradition. Do we know who the authors of Book 1 and Book 2 were in the Bible, or is it just?
Well, I mean, the Bible is named after the people who wrote each book, mm-hmm. you want to call it, and this is kind of a difficult thing to classify, because they're called gospels. We say the book of Matthew and stuff, but it's really the Gospel of Matthew, and those are people who wrote these books, or sometimes wrote about them. Mm-hmm. They're either named after the author themselves, or they are named after the central figures in these chapters. And interestingly enough, there are several scriptures that are left out of the Bible that didn't make the cut, mm-hmm. of early Christian thinkers. The Bible was not around for the first century, maybe even first 2 centuries that Christianity was. People just shared these past them, usually by word of mouth, mm-hmm. and the oral tradition. Yep. Yeah. But it wasn't always. Sometimes the few people who could read, they would pass tablets or scrolls or whatever they had to work with at the time, but that made things very difficult to group together. They could not include every single Christian writer who came about. There's some stuff called the Gospel of Judas. There's the Gospel of Thomas. There's tons of scriptures that were not put into the Bible, and the Gnostics were at least early enough to be mentioned as a couple of their sects in the book of Revelations. So mm-hmm. the book of Revelations came a long time after the rest of the scriptures did. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about the New Testament. The Old Testament is a different story. That there are names on it, and we do Leviticus, but for the rest of it, when it's like Exodus and that sort of thing, we don't fully know who wrote these. We know they were ancient Jews in and around the Levant, but aside from that, it's not always clear. There's a lot of debate about that going on.
Okay. All right. So moving on, we've got mysteries with a lowercase m.
Okay.
What is that exactly?
So mysteries are either the initiation rites that are very well protected and secretive, inherent to any religion, really, but especially the pagan ones and the esoteric ones. They're just these are the things, these are the practices, and to a degree, doctrine, scriptures that the lower level is not prepared to witness or know about. And these things, they're usually quite benign. Not always, but they usually are. 90% of cases, it's just things that they don't want the predominant religion to know about, because it is going to be seen as scary. And it's amazing how we as humans have both a strong draw and also a strong aversion to ritual. It scares us, but we all have rituals. We just see other people's rituals as threatening.
Right. So, as a modern example of mysteries, could we say like the Freemasons or the Masons?
Those would definitely be an example, but an example that more people might know about. Maybe not. I might be biased here, but would be the LDS Church. That it was pulled a lot from right hand path stuff. It was all white magic, and Joseph Smith was involved with a whole lot of that. And back then, that wasn't seen as good or acceptable at all. But these days, it's kind of a big shrug. And often they would not allow Mormons into Masonry or into Rosicrucians. I think that Thelema would have been quite thrilled if any Mormon came upon their doorstep, but it just didn't happen that often. But Mormons were not allowed in these sects, either from their own church or from the mystery schools themselves, because they would figure out pretty quickly that, gosh, this is a lot like the esoteric bits of my own religion. Some of them are identical.
Would it be safe to say that the Catholic religion or the Islamic religion have their own mysteries as well? I mean, just to be fair.
Yes. Every single religion has their mysteries. They have a lot less of them, usually, or that they do not guard them with the same sort of life and death viewpoint as the, quote, mystery schools do. But, yeah, the Catholic Church has a lot of mysteries. That's most of the tradition that they have. Any single rite that you have to build upon incrementally to get to is considered a mystery.
So this is very similar to what we see in Scientology, as far as when you speak about the upper levels, the OT levels, and things like that. It's really no big deal because they all have their own quote unquote mysteries. Right.
This is something that is just integral to the structure. This is something we are inclined to as a species. It's just something that happens. So I know people sometimes make a whole fuss about, oh, why can't you know everything at once? And then why don't you tell people everything? And this isn't new. This isn't something that's even just inherent to Western mystery tradition. This is something that you see in most religions, that there is or are materials that are hidden and only given to people who are deemed in a stable enough spiritual state or have reached the various stages of enlightenment to be able to get it.
It's very interesting. And lastly, we've got face value, quote unquote. What is that?
Okay. So, face value. I want to make it clear first that this is not my opinion. this is something that is inherent to esotericism with or without the capital E. Face value just means at first glance, what you think of at first glance. Like, you would use it the same way that you use it in a conversation or description of a social interaction. So if I said not to take somebody who was covertly hostile at face value, you would probably agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for the esoteric religions that are out there, especially Western mystery tradition. When you're reading Crowley or Helena Blavatsky or even L. Ron Hubbard, you aren't likely to get it, especially if you're new, when you read over it the first time, because it is intentionally shrouded in mystery. In fact, in the Quran, it says there are 6 layers to the Quran itself. Of course, the Quran does also say that it does not negate the other messages you could receive from the Quran, but that's kind of the outlier. In other mystery traditions, you cannot just read it the first time and think, I understand this, and this is how it is, and I don't need to go over it again.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not going to work. You're not going to get it, and it's going to be confusing. That's the way it was written. And you have to practice a lot, and that will help. And if you are practicing and trying your best to understand this and actually make a journey out of it, then every time you go over it, you will see it through different lenses, and you will understand more of what is actually being said. It is mostly hidden in allegory, and even the second time over, you're not going to fully get it. It's just getting closer and closer. So that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about when I mention face value.
Face value. Okay, good. All right, so we got those definitions out of the way. What we're going to do is we're going to start from basically year 1 of Scientology, and we're going to work our way back through history. We thought this would be the best way to go about this, to just try and show the roots of Scientology, where these parallels are in these other religious subjects, and just kind of roll our way back and what the major players and the influencers were throughout history that helped form Scientology. Now, it is to note that we're not going to get into the history of psychiatry or the mind or anything like that in this podcast, this 2-part podcast. This is just everything else. We'll hit that later on next week or the week after that. We'll get into Papa Freud and Kant and all those guys. So
yeah, and it would be good to also get into the difference in culture at the time surrounding sci-fi writers and surrounding just how brutal psychiatry was at the time.
Right.
So we'll do that next time. This is strictly about religion.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so where are we going to head first?
Okay, so the first place I guess we're going to start with is that I guess since we have new listeners, we should talk about Scientology, earlier Dianetics being formed, and that this happened in 1950, and Dianetics was written in 1949, and this was the era right smack after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of collective trauma and just disillusionment and seeking going on.
Mm-hmm. Baby boomers, people coming back from the war.
Yeah, I think that baby boomers were being born during this time, but yeah, the people who were coming home at the time and who were experiencing traumatic symptoms and nobody was helping them with that. That was what was happening.
Right. It's interesting to note that the people that were involved in the bigger booms in Scientology were born either pre-World War II or maybe even in some cases post-World War I in the 1950s.
Right.
These people were very much more well-educated than the baby boomers who came into being in Scientology in the late 60s and 70s. Scientology saw two really big booms in the 70s and the mid to late 80s. Probably the biggest boom was in the 70s, I would say. So we're talking about day one and earlier, and we're looking at a nuclear world.
Yeah, and reality was changing during this time for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, I mean, God, millions of people were just killed in the worst war this planet has ever seen, as far as we know, and just all of this awfulness was exposed to people who had no idea for the first time. And there were also many other events. People were just starting to en masse acknowledge the paranormal. Roswell had just happened. It was an eventful time period. And the only people who ended up pursuing Dianetics past its initial boom, and especially Scientology, were people who were seekers, who had some problem or who were looking for something because they were, as I said, deeply disillusioned with their culture and whatever else was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a time when it wasn't the 60s yet where new religious movements were something you did because everybody was doing it.
Right, as a counterculture type of a thing.
Right. This is when this kind of stuff, talking about esotericism, really wasn't acceptable. And so the people who ended up in this were people who had the capacity to read a lot of stuff and dig deeper and wholly understand and commit to something.
Mm-hmm. They were looking for something.
Yes.
So this sort of paints the picture, puts a frame around it for Hubbard's mindset, in that he was one of these people and he was looking for a solution. And based off of his own personal history and the travels that he had done and the people that he had met, decided to write Dianetics and then got it published on May 9th, 1950.
Right. And Hubbard didn't need to embellish his life story. It was already plenty colorful. Mm-hmm. He had already been a seeker before World War II happened. And so after World War II, it just multiplied that for him. Mm-hmm. So he spent lots of time at the library, and he was a bookworm. Not only could he write just amazingly fast, he would read as well. He would just consume books. And not only did he love fiction, of course, like he wrote in his early days, but he also had a keen interest in philosophy and the lesser known religions of the world.
Mm-hmm. So he was looking for a solution to his own personal problems that he had. He had this diverse background in pulp science fiction.
Right.
Written millions and millions of words and gotten very good at it. Yeah. He was also what you would call probably one of the greatest distillers of information the world has ever known.
Yes, he was. He has written more than anyone else has on the planet that we know of. And going back to the earlier thing, he tried really hard to receive help for whatever it was that he was going through, from probably just like everyone else, the brutality of World War II. But the Veterans Association never took care of him. They kind of let a lot of people just go off on their merry way and said, good luck.
They didn't know what to do with him, in other words.
Yeah, and that was the case with so many other soldiers. It just was. It was unfortunate, but they, I guess, saw that it wasn't worth the trouble. And even then, who would want to be in the grasp of the psychiatric system as it existed then. I mean, God, what's his name? Doctor, the name fails me right now. The man who brought the lobotomy into prime time, he received a Nobel Prize right around this time for that practice. Yeah, all those things combined, he was looking for something.
Right. So it was a very brutal time in the domain of the mind.
Right. And people had nowhere to go.
Right. So they were looking for a solution, and Dianetics at that time posed a solution. Was a really big, almost overnight success for the solution that it posed to what was ailing these people mentally.
Right. And it got results was the thing. Unlike other self-help books at the time, it could be tried out and people would feel better immediately. And going back even earlier, LRH himself, I'm sure, was feeling the ache that the country and the world felt from the traumatic war that the entire planet has just been through. It was way worse than World War One. And when World War One happened, the Great War, people didn't think it could get any worse. So he was looking for something that would not diminish his freedom. And so often where people turn is religion. And because he had an established interest in things that were considered taboo or were alternative, he went off into the, I really prefer to not use this word, but the occult world. And so I guess this is the point where we need to talk about Parsons. And
get into the 800-pound elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's broach that, and let's start rolling back from the publication and production of Dianetics as to the formative information closest to present. What was Hubbard basing some of this information off of from Parsons?
Well, you know what I'm seeing here before Parsons. This, just as a quick side note, we should get into this the next subject that we do a lot more. But it was already evident after Hubbard had left, being with Parsons and Crowley's circle, that it was already evident that he learned a lot from it, enough to be considered a talented hypnotist in a known fashion among his inner circle of sci-fi nerds. So we have to talk about Parsons, yes, but he was not a dabbler. Let's start off with that.
Right, but he did something. He did it right.
Yeah. He got really, really into this, and he learned a lot, you could say, straight from the horse's mouth. I mean, but by this time, Crowley was living as a heroin addict, moving from bunkhouse to bunkhouse, and was only keeping up with his organization through letters. He was not really running the show as tightly. He kind of stopped caring because he had other concerns about his health.
Right.
So he had given the organization OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, over to a young rocket scientist and engineer named Jack Parsons. And Parsons had been a loyal follower for a long time and managed to get a house, or a mansion rather, in Pasadena with the money he made from rocketry and being involved with the government's propulsion laboratory.
Right, he was the founder of JPL.
Yeah, he was. Him and his friends. And he would do these hymns and these various ceremonies before blasting off his rockets. And he was, I mean, I have to be honest, he was high on amphetamine some of the time when he was doing this, and in front of other government lab workers doing this weird occult stuff in the lab.
Right, the late 1940s rocket science junkie.
Yeah, he was a character. He was, and his scientist co-workers didn't give a shit. They were just like, okay, totally fine, whatever, dude. just keep building the rocket. It's fine.
Right, so, right. We'll look the other way for the time being and get what we want out of this.
Oh yeah, the lab techs would, but the upper level people couldn't do that for long. But
right, that's in the end, it caught up with it.
Yeah, it did. It really screwed him over. I mean, he made a series of bad decisions, and I'm sure it started with the drug use and his judgment being off kilter, to say the least. Mm-hmm. But I think that was partially because success gets to people sometimes.
Right, they think they're bulletproof.
Yeah, like when people win the lottery and they lose it all in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. Same type of thing.
Right, and so Hubbard rented a room in the mansion.
Well, yeah. Hubbard showed up and saw an ad, I think in the back of a Astounding Science Fiction.
Imagine that.
Like that. Yeah. This is a funny side note. The Rosicrucians actually used to advertise at the back of the very same magazine, and it's so funny. It was kind of anything goes. But
right, but this was the character of the people. This was the flavor of the time, that the forward thinkers. The TV was around. You had to have quite a bit of money to have a TV.
Right.
Color TV was also around, but there weren't very many color TV broadcasts or anything like that. And all you had was radio. But this is long before cellular phones and things like that. And there just plain wasn't a whole lot to do.
Right.
Reading was a pastime, or listening to the radio. So science fiction, pulp science fiction, was an escape.
Yeah, like when people are watching their trashy reality shows now, or their guilty pleasure YouTubers, it's the same type of thing. But also this is something you'll also see throughout history, where people turn to religion because, especially, I would say, showy religion, religion with some panache, because they're bored.
Right. What else are you going to do? Yeah,
when there's something that we might see as disturbing today, too ritualistic or whatever, back then, whether it was Christian or otherwise, people are like, hey, what the hell? Mm-hmm. What else am I going to go do?
Right. There's only so many things to occupy your mind when you're not earning a living.
Right. And that's true. And so Hubbard showed up one night in 1946, and he told Parsons that he had seen his ad and yada yada. He told him a little bit about himself, and he probably embellished it based off of what I have read, but Parsons didn't really give a crap either way. He was just happy that somebody who had the money and was interested, not only didn't care what he did, was interested in what he did highly. Mm-hmm. He was happy that they had these few mutual interests, that this dude's showing up. And so he gave him the room, and he was not just a roommate. They quickly became fast friends, partners in crime even. Mm-hmm. They were
pretty tight.
They were pretty tight. They were doing all of the magic, and Parsons was teaching him everything he knew, and was revealing to him these mysteries, these secrets, or these ways of thinking that he had only dabbled in before, that he could only get into the surface before, because he'd read about it. Sure, he was an avid reader, but before then it was strictly an outside scholarly approach. Now he got to be in it, and he got to see it firsthand. And based off of what we know about his personality, I think that's part of the deal. Mm-hmm. He wanted to see it up close and wanted to experiment.
Right.
So that is what happened. So
there was an underlying interest that Hubbard had.
Yes.
In these areas. And I think it's important that we take a side rail here and mention that as taboo as these subjects have been made, especially with the advent of the internet, and Scientology and Parsons and the OTO and all of that stuff, everything is derivative. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's art or it's science, mathematics. People get ideas from other areas that subsequently create fantastic creations. Ultimately, you have to start somewhere. There has to be a jumping off point, and this was no different for Hubbard.
Yeah, and when you combine two or more ideas, it does become a new idea. Mm-hmm. That's just how it works. And there is a term for these types of belief systems. It's called syncretic. Syncretic religions are ones that pull from multiple sources.
There you go, boys and girls. Make a sentence or two with syncretic for me. That's something you don't hear every day on the bus on the way to work.
No, it's not. It is unfortunate how little information there is out there about this, and it's subject to a whole lot of dubbing and just a whole lot of A equals A equals A. Mm-hmm. Like, we can talk about the really, how do I put it, the usually difficult to confront part of the whole saga between him and Parsons. I'm not talking about him ripping him off. Like, yeah, that happened. But like, I'm talking about the Babylon working stuff.
Yeah, let's get into that real quick.
Okay. So I have to also explain here that in very recent left-hand path schools of thought, and this is something that goes back and is derivative to a degree of Gnosticism, there was this new way of thinking that the Antichrist, Lucifer, these types of staples are not literal deities, and people who were invoking these names were not like sitting there going, oh, hell yeah, I'm so evil and I'm just getting off on how evil I am. That's not what's happening. That's not what that was. When people in esotericism, and this does not go for all of Western esotericism, it doesn't even go for half of it, but a great deal of Western esotericism views Lucifer, the Antichrist. They usually stay away from the word Satan, but not always. The beast, 666, all that. They see that as something you also have to look deeply into. Just as the Gnostics generally saw fallen angels, such as Lucifer, to be neutral figures. A few of them saw him as bad, but a few of them saw him as good too. Saw him as the one who was coming to enlighten the world against the orders of, as we mentioned before, the narcissistic demiurge. And this was knowledge that Adam and Eve were not supposed to have, and that the snake who made them eat from the tree of knowledge just wanted them to become self-aware. And that self-awareness is not a bad thing. And the idea that it is an example of the very programming that was intended. Now, whatever your viewpoints on that are, I ask you for a minute just to suspend disbelief and drop all that and see it as if you've never heard the story before.
Right. Because
that's where this comes from. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the people like LaVey and LaVey he's not even religious at all. He's an atheist, but he believes that Lucifer represents an archetype of rebellion and individualism, and he was actually more heavily influenced by Ayn Rand than anyone else, even Crowley. But Crowley saw people or figures such as fallen angels and Antichrist to be rebel figures, ones who would liberate and enlighten the world. He
shake things up.
Yeah, he didn't see this as something to do just to be edgy. He He didn't think he was putting a middle finger to the establishment or anything like that. He saw this as truth. And there are a bunch of different interpretations of how he got that. Some people say it was just something he got from his Gnostic learnings or all of the religious studies that he did, because he was a well-informed man. He researched a lot. He was raised a fundamentalist Christian, and he was deep into it when he was growing up and as an adolescent. And he studied various religions all across the globe. And he did something called automatic writing, which is where you just turn off your brain and write whatever comes out. And this is what he got. And so from the various methods that he and other people used, they came up with these ideas. And I will reiterate again, they do not believe in a literal dualistic world of black and white like the old Gnostics did. And even if they did not believe that these figures in the Bible were tangibly real. They were representative. So
more so of a concept.
Yes. Or to something that is allegorical, to something that is actually occurring in the spiritual universe. And the face value thing, they did not think the Bible was to be taken at face value. And Moore, Crowley, and other people in that area got into it. They saw that, okay, none of this physically happened. That's not what's being described here. This is a battle between knowing and not knowing. That's all that Gnosticism means. Gnosticism means to know.
That's interesting, with Scientology being knowing how to know is the meaning of the word Scientology.
Yes, and many religious academics and professors have asserted that Scientology is a modern form of Gnosticism. Mm-hmm. And there is no doubt in my mind that is at least partially where Hubbard got the idea. And so the Babylon working thing, people who are talking about it from, again, a polemic perspective are going to be subject to bias. I mean, we all are anyway. Even I'm not free of bias. Nobody is. But they are coming at it from either a believer's or a culturally Christian standpoint. And as I was saying about just esotericism in general, they first ask you to deprogram yourself of all of that, but most importantly, the fear of hell. So the light bringer is what Lucifer means. That means enlightenment in Thelema's eyes, at least, in some Thelemites' eyes. Thelemites have no doctrine or dogma the way other religions do. They only have really one line that is their doctrine. It's do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. All that means, and that is easy to have an MU on as well. Mm-hmm. All of that means do what thou wilt. It doesn't mean do whatever you want. That means find your true will, which is find your spiritual purpose. Find what makes not you the body with addictions and preconceptions. No, find what makes the core of you happy and that you are best at, and that is your purpose in the universe.
Your muse or muses.
Yeah, it could be your muse or your hat. You could look at it
either way,
different ways. Yeah.
Right.
And shall be the whole of the law. That's it. Love is the law. And so that all that means is my freedom to punch ends where your face begins. So do not, it's like the non-aggression principle. Mm-hmm. Do not step on anybody else's toes. Don't violate anybody else's rights. Don't hurt people. It's the golden rule. That is something that is very important in Western esotericism. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like overts. Like, would you want someone to do that to yourself? Then don't do it. That sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So, going back to Babylon working, that was a magical attempt which Crowley found a little bit ridiculous, honestly. When he heard about it, he laughed and shook his head. Oh, God, something like that. That was a ritual that was performed, and I'll be blunt, with sex magic by inherency to produce the one who would enlighten the world, or in some language, the Antichrist. And what that essentially meant for Thelemites was that would be somebody who was a very powerful magician, somebody who was very wise and who would be a threat to the establishment and be a revolutionary in a spiritual way. Mm-hmm. So that's what that meant. But that is often used as a point of slander. And that's also something I've seen Scientologists not want to confront, because they're not, they kind of engage in that A equals A stuff.
Right.
And they can't differentiate.
Right. You have to have a very open mind and suspend your disbelief and look at what the history of these things are and where all of these things derive from.
Yes.
Because as we mentioned before, Hubbard was a really good distiller of information. We were talking earlier today, some of the concepts that Tesla used. And at the time that he was doing these things, he came up with concepts that nobody had ever come up with before, and was using derivative concepts in order to try these things out. And he was looked at as crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's definitely a good parallel. And he was doing, talking about Tesla, he was doing stuff that was considered to be literal black magic. I mean, people were terrified of electricity when it came out. People didn't know what to think. They'd never seen anything like it. Mm-hmm. And if you brought back an iPhone, probably just 50 years, people would call it sorcery. Mm-hmm. I'm quite sure of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is stuff. We see this time and time again. This is a subject for a different episode, where sci-fi predicts technology that comes out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole other thing to unpack. But what we were saying about not coming at this from any sort of preconceptions you might have, I'm not asking you to abandon any sort of religious views or embrace the devil or anything crazy like that. All I'm saying is acknowledge the intention behind this. This was not some act of evil. This was seen as a step towards global enlightenment. And that is a whole other conversation that can be had about sort of a difference between left and right hand path. Some people think that some people in the right hand path think that there is only a finite amount of magic out there in the world, something that Scientologists might even call theta. There's only so much, because this is not literal magic like we think about it, like Harry Potter and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to change the world for the better and bring about new consciousness, and through art or whatever. And that's usually what magic means. And like anything else, you have to start with the first dynamic yourself. If you change your own way of thinking, anything can become anything. You can embrace any valence, or you can make a reality true for yourself. And that's what magic is. If you can do that, then you can present your ideas out there through writing or through art, and that is changing the world, and that is an act of magic. Mm-hmm. So that is one very common viewpoint, and that's the most common viewpoint. And that is what's considered high magic, where it's more of a philosophy and a form of self-hypnosis than anything else. And so that's, I guess, all that needs to be said about the Babylon working thing. That although that is used as a damning sort of point. When you know the context behind it, it really isn't.
Mm-hmm. When you put it in the proper context.
Right. It's all about intention.
Mm-hmm. Now, did Parsons have anything to do with this?
Yes, Parsons was directly involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And so the intent in doing this was to evoke enlightenment. Were they successful in any way, or what was the end result of it?
Well, they very much wanted the woman who was to be the catalyst for this, quote, moon child to show up, and they kept doing rituals and trying to manifest the powers within their own mind. There's this idea common in Western esotericism that humans are spiritual beings inherently, and they have a divinity inherent to themselves, but that was lost somewhere along the way. And that also sounds familiar. Right,
that's very familiar in Scientology as far as what a spirit or a thetan is, and that they have an unlimited resource in themselves. That it's just all held down with strings of linen, and Scientology helps get them back to, quote unquote, native ability or native state.
Right. And that's what esotericism tries to do. That's what Buddhism tries to do. That's what a lot of the philosophies and religions, religious philosophies try to do. That is the objective. It's the goal. And so, yeah, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, what was the end result of the Babylon working project?
Well, after using their mental energy or spiritual energy or theta, if you want to put it in Scientologies, and a redheaded woman did show up, sure enough, on Jack Parsons' doorstep. These were, before goth girls were a thing, they had the attitude and all that, and she was totally down. She was ready for this. She was, I'm good. When do we do it? Let's go. Mm-hmm. And Parsons did all the utility of that part. And, supposedly at one point, her name was Marjorie Cameron. She did get pregnant, but they I don't know how to say this nicely. They wussed out. They terminated the pregnancy. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I think that was because Jack Parsons realized finally in his drug addicted state, he had a moment of clarity that he would have to raise this child who was supposed to become the enlightener of the world, but he might end up totally screwing him up and creating a monster.
Mm-hmm. Didn't want that responsibility.
He didn't want that responsibility. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he thought he could do it, but when the reality started hitting him, he was like, "Oh, we are not prepared for this at all." Mm-hmm. To raise the Messiah, basically, we can't do this. So right. They gave up, and that was after, not terribly long after, but that was after Hubbard had ripped him off and skipped town. So that everyone knows about that. I guess if you don't, he pulled a bit of a job on him, and after stealing his girlfriend. But there was a whole lot of that going on at the Lame already. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that was part of the culture where people would just kind of use each other. I mean, because the people who ended up in Thelema in the 40s in the United States, they generally weren't at the top of their lives, and they did feel a tremendous amount of liberation and relief, but they often did not work on themselves, and they did not take responsibility. And so this was just something that happened, and LRH fucked him over.
And this is before he kind of straightened himself out with Dianetics and took a more forward path, if you will.
Yes.
Excuse the pun.
Yeah. It was. He started working on it after he left, and he did end up giving a lot of the money and the boats back to Parsons, but not before Parsons performed a ritual to retrieve his ass.
So everything ultimately somewhat got worked out.
Yeah, I mean,
the end.
It did. Parsons had a new girlfriend, and he didn't really care. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's start going back down the time track a little bit more. And where do we go from here?
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda would be, I think we should talk a little bit about the fact that Thelema directly led to Hubbard writing Dianetics. Hubbard was very, very focused on the Greek aspect of Thelema. Thelema is also syncretic. It pulls from a lot of different things. It's not just Western esotericism. It has a lot of different pagan roots. And some, like I said, some Thelemites are completely atheistic and have different ideas because there is no set doctrine on what these things actually mean. It's like live your own truth. It's only true if it's true for you. It's a lot like that.
Right.
So Hubbard seemed to very much have a preference for the Greek deity Diana. And he wrote of her a lot. And in his journals and stuff, he referenced her, and he talked about having a holy guardian angel, which is a concept in Thelema, of kind of like in other similar traditions, there are spirit guides and dream advisors and that sort of thing. And that is...
This wasn't much different than that. No,
it wasn't. And usually this is seen just like tarot cards and all that business as an extension of your own consciousness, and kind of like a tulpa. And that is essentially what he was using to be his muse. He formed his own muse, and that was, I don't know if Diana was the name of his guardian angel. That is between him and himself. But he referenced her a lot when he was writing Dianetics to get inspired.
Or Dianus.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So it probably comes from that, at least partially. And it's interesting. I actually have a note on this newest. It has something that has a lot of context to it. Like it's not just as simple as a word for the mind. That is not all that it is. This is something that comes from the Hellenic line of thought very, very clearly, and not even in the pagan way. A lot of this is pulled from the Greek philosophers, Socrates, and very, very often Plato. I mean,
which he credits in some of the early books quite a bit as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he talks about Crowley on the briefing course. Yeah. So this is something he acknowledges. The church does not. I need to put that out there, that the church denies all of this. They claim that this was some sort of mission for the feds and yada, yada, yada. Whatever. That's the story.
Right. And all we're trying to do here is we're trying to, trace this whole thing back. We're not trying to vilify Hubbard or anything like that. Obviously, we still practice Independent Scientology here at AOGP. And we're just trying to sort of unravel the tale from a viewpoint of less unbiased individuals and kind of tell the tale with a clean brush.
Right. And we were talking about this before, that if you buy into the sort of golden child, perfect overachiever narrative, this deification process that is formed around Hubbard's life, you're probably you're just setting yourself up for an ARC break. Mm-hmm. You are.
Yeah, an upset, in other words. If you don't know what an ARC break is, it's an upset based off of affinity, reality, communication, and the basis of all of those is understanding. You're going to be a little disillusioned when you find that the narrative is not necessarily what the church would like to paint it, in other words.
Right. And fully acknowledging that L. Ron Hubbard could be a little bit of a jerk, to say the least, does not discredit or devalue the work that he did.
Right. Like he says, you ever have a problem with the Scientology or the technology of Scientology? It isn't the technology itself. It's the personalities involved. That included him.
Right.
That includes us.
Yeah. He was far from perfect. And even Scientology itself is far from perfect. But it's damn good, and it's better than anything else out there, in my opinion.
Right. Mine as well. It may not have all of the answers, but it's a hell of a great start.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's based off of all of these things that came before it that they're basically, Scientology is made up of a lot of derivative concepts, which we're trying to discuss here in this podcast and future ones as well.
Right. And to a degree, I even think that this is better. It's a far better story. All of this, having lived this sordid, colorful life and then achieving something. If it was all just great from the beginning, what kind of story is that?
Right. The most colorful people have the best stories and the most believable stories.
Right. So that's the way of looking at it that I have. I do not come from a background where I ever heard any of the false narratives around his life, but that has not changed my opinion, and I'm still here.
Right.
So, acknowledging all of that and talking about the holy guardian angel and all that stuff, you can see other allusions to OTO stuff, to Thelema, to Esotericism in his affirmations, mm-hmm. which were a document or a series of documents that were found among his possessions long after he had established the church. Mm-hmm. And it is verified, they are his and all that, and it's definitely his writing. And this is what we're talking about with I guess I can't think of a better, more neutral word for it, but sort of self-hypnosis, where you have to validate yourself and talk yourself into success. It's the law of attraction. You put out there what you want. You make your own truth. Right.
And these sorts of concepts existed long before Scientology and long before Dianetics.
Yeah.
And these concepts were pulled and finely tuned and everything like that and represented almost entirely in their own nomenclature within the confines of Dianetics and Scientology as definitions of these concepts.
Right. And when you get right down to it, all of this stuff is just metaphysics. That's what it is.
Right.
And I think now would be a good time to draw the comparison. So the elephant in the room, the other one, is that people are going to associate, or kind of A equals A, the Illuminati stuff, the sort of evil mm-hmm. version of esotericism mm-hmm. that is out there. Mm-hmm. But that is by no means the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's a lot like Scientology. Anything that can be used for good can be used for very bad as well.
Right.
I mean, look what's happened in the church.
Right. And Hubbard documented that on the Philadelphia Doctrine course and said, this will happen at some point.
Right.
And if it does happen, do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened throughout history in multiple religions as well.
Yeah. And he knew that. He probably saw that was already happening and had been happening in esotericism, except it was hidden. The people who are doing it openly are not bad people. They're on a spiritual trip, on a spiritual journey. They're not hiding anything.
Right.
But a lot like what has happened in the church, there are people who have corrupted things and who have taken things and they have immused. And this is what Crowley would have called a, quote, black brother. Mm-hmm. And that is someone who has purely evil intentions in using these sorts of techniques. Mm-hmm. And that we can relate to the concepts of Black Dianetics and Black Scientology. Mm-hmm.
Right. So even with Crowley, he even saw that this sort of thing was extant and actually had a term for it, similar to what LRH just only a few years later would coin as Black Dianetics, that it could be used against people in order to enslave.
Right. Exactly. So this is something that happens. It happened with Christianity. We know that it did. Mm-hmm. I mean, even leaving out, and there's no reason we should, but even leaving out the Spanish Inquisition and just the Crusades, the Children's Crusades, and just all of the extremist versions of Islam that have become more popular in recent decades. Just all of that stuff is just another example of people abusing spirituality and weaponizing it and using it for whatever purpose, just evil purposes.
Mm-hmm. History repeating itself. Mm-hmm. So in a religious context.
Yep. And it's happened in the Catholic Church. It's happened in Islam. Anything you can think of, it's happened. It happened when people had perennialist pagan religions, and the local king in ancient times said, "Oh, I am this guy. I am this god that you all worship." It always happens, and it's always for the same political reason: control.
Right, which we've seen with Miscavige in the church.
Right,
chairman of the board.
Mm-hmm. It has just become a high control group. Mm-hmm. That's it, mm-hmm. And that's all it is. It's just abuse and not given a crap. And I guess a suppressive person never knows they're suppressive, so it's easily justified. But even Crowley acknowledged that.
That's really interesting.
It is, and Crowley said that a black brother will be able to rationalize it any way they can.
Mm-hmm. Which is very similar to the suppressive person concepts and the technical bulletins on the subject.
Yes, it is. And just like in Scientology, Crowley was not a great dude. The founder of Thelema was not a great dude. He was very flawed, and it was his undoing in the end. Mm-hmm. So this is something that you see in every religion. Mm-hmm. Every single
Parsons, one. Parsons was a genius when it came to rocket science, but
yeah. But didn't know that he shouldn't handle explosives while high on various types of speed at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. And
nobody's perfect.
No.
Right.
And I'm not saying he deserved that or anything like that.
No, it's unfortunate for somebody that was as brilliant as him, and we would not have gotten to the moon if it weren't for him.
No, we wouldn't have. And it's just, it's such a sad thing that not only did he die that tragic death, but people who break from the mold in a spiritual sense are, and a socio-political sense are always vilified. And if they do happen to make it and have a significant influence, the history books go back and they change the context to say, oh, they were completely in line with the culture, and at the time they cooperated with the government and they were benign. Mm-hmm. That's what they did with Martin Luther King, and that's why we're not taught about Malcolm X in school until very, very late, mm-hmm. because that is harder to spin. Right. It was more deliberate in a lot of ways. Right, it was. Malcolm stuff. Yeah, that's happened with Gandhi. Mm-hmm. It's happened, like I said, with MLK. Just every single person who is a revolutionary in any sense of the word, who manages to do it, they are changed. History is revised so that it doesn't look like they went against the mold.
Right. It sort of provides the narrative of the powers that be.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so let's start rolling back a little bit. We're in the early part of the 20th century.
Yes, this is all right. So the dates that, like I said, Hubbard was involved from early 1945 or mid 1945 to late 1946 in an official capacity, but continued into the late 40s into about 48, 49. We're not going to get into Nibs, if you believe him. Went into the 50s, but he's a dubious source. So the next part is talking about Crowley's background. So Crowley's background was that, like I said, he was a fundamentalist Quaker growing up. Yes. And he was into it. He wasn't like a rebel kid who was like, I hate my parents or anything like that. He genuinely enjoyed his life. But when he got to be an adult and was going around preaching and selling Bibles, he started to get disillusioned and started to question. He wanted to see if there was more to this, to what was in the Bible. And they weren't having it. His community and where he grew up in the UK was not about it. They saw it as heretical, that he would even be questioning. And it's not that he was becoming an apostate yet. It was that he had a different opinion, not as radical as it became towards the end of his life, but he had a different opinion on what the Bible was saying. He was just asking, is there another layer to this? So he was slowly questioning things. And then finally in college, since he was bisexual, he finally had an encounter with another man. And then that everything started falling for him. That gave him permission in his mind when he finally broke what was at the time considered to be an ultimate taboo. He said, screw it. This is when I'm going to look into this stuff. So he did, and he would go to the library, and he started getting involved in different groups that held cryptic knowledge, and he started traveling all over the world, studying different things. I mean, he studied Islamic mysticism. He studied Kemetism, which is a revival of ancient Egyptian paganism. He studied the ancient Gnostics. He was able to acquire 5,000-year-old texts on ceremonial magic. So he was a seeker. He was like the ultimate seeker at the time.
Guy.
Yeah. And this was at a time when none of this was acceptable at all. They just, from the beginning, this is seen as, what the hell is this guy doing? It was freaking out most people. But I think part of that is that he needed a counterculture. He needed that just to liberate himself. And
so he's looking for something more.
Yeah, and you couldn't find that so easily back then. You couldn't just go to the nearest hipster bar and hang out. There was nothing like that.
Right.
The Bohemian sort of, I don't know, subgroups, subcultures just were not as big back then. And when they were not intellectual enough for him. So he would go and he kind of hopped around different sects for a while, but he eventually found somewhat of a home in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was another right-hand path ceremonial magic group. And they weren't as woo, casting a spell, hand motions, all that, as much as they were focused, as Hermeticism is, with the magic of the mind and the power of changing one's own perception and accessing higher levels of consciousness and trying to get out of the death rebirth cycle. that's really their main focus, or at least what it was. They're no longer around.
Similar to Buddhism.
Yeah, very similar to Buddhism, similar to the Jains, similar to a lot of the Eastern religions. That many of them want to get out of the death and rebirth cycle. That is a thing that you see a lot. Mm-hmm. And so that was also influential. And I think in the next episode, we'll totally get into the Eastern stuff, mm-hmm. because they deserve just as much attention because they were just as influential. I mean, that is something Hubbard didn't have any problem acknowledging. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's interesting to put this in context. This period that he was looking into this would have been, timeline-wise, roughly what year?
Crowley?
Yeah.
This is 1898 to 99 that he joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
So towards the tail end of the Industrial Revolution, he's looking into subject matter about there being multiple lifetimes and people having past lives and things like this, these are common themes that come up in Scientology, in auditing or spiritual counseling, that nobody pushes you for, but they do come out and people start talking about it and everything. So here's another parallel that we're seeing 50 years plus prior to the publishing date of Dianetics. And there was even a point shortly thereafter in the LA lectures where Hubbard said, this past life stuff, it's a bunch of hooey.
Yeah.
Don't believe it. And then the next day he comes out and says, what I was saying about it being a bunch of hooey, forget that I said that. It's real.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that is something that's another thing that is hard to deprogram yourself from if you were raised Christian or in any Abrahamic religion, talking strictly non-Gnostic, especially. It's hard to get out of that fear of hell and the idea that this is the only life.
Programming.
Yeah, it is. That's just something that's there. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if you're not a Christian, even if you grow up completely irreligious, people who are in this culture, mm-hmm. when they have a near-death experience, they will see Jesus, mm-hmm. that sort of thing. But a Hindu, they will see a Hindu deity. Mm-hmm. And just like as somebody, if they were raised in a strictly animist religion, that could be African or Japanese in the form of Shinto or whatever, they will see their ancestors. It's mm-hmm. that sort of thing. And that is how deep the cultural programming is. And that is why people like Crowley saw it as so important to deprogram yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right. In Scientology, we even have a tech reference for that, false data stripping, to
right.
Kind of clear the decks and go, what can you think with, what can't you think with, and where did that datum come from? And is it true for you? Is it not true for you?
Right.
That sort of a thing. So,
and that's liberation theology in and of itself.
Right. Right. And it's important to note that the underlying theme with Crowley all the way through Scientology and Dianetics and multiple other modern day religions and even predating Crowley in the late 1890s is this theme of free will.
Yes, of individual freedom, mm-hmm. and freedom of mind and freedom of thought.
Right. And we're going to follow this all the way back.
Yep, we are. And so this goes way back before all of the edgy symbolism was added to offend people, because that was seen as a positive or as something necessary. Before that was added, this goes back as far as you can take it. Mm-hmm. It just does, and that is an idea called perennialism. And perennialism is stuff that you see popping up in cultures that exist in different continents, like the old hag, Baba, what is her name? Baba Yaga, I think, mm-hmm. in Russian, mm-hmm. right? You see her all over the world. This forest witch that lives all over, and this ancestor worship. This is stuff that comes up everywhere, and we'll talk about the Great Flood too. The flood myths, just all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's all these underlying themes all over the planet
Right.
These common parallels, these core concepts. Free will probably being the most uptone or easy to think with, and everybody can have, is that they don't want to have their free will violated. But when people are programmed by these spiritual concepts, from early childhood on, it's hard to snap out of them. This is something that Crowley was looking into.
Yes, it definitely was. And it wasn't just him. It was people before him. He didn't even create the OTO. Crowley was not the founder of the OTO. He just took it to the next level. And I'll explain what I mean by that. He had a falling out with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Basically, he, how should I put it? A Scientology parallel would be that he was looking at upper level material, and they were getting upset with him. Mm-hmm. And there was a shouting match where they wouldn't let him in to the gate at one point. Literally, he was locked outside, mm-hmm. and they're yelling. And
you can't come in.
Yeah. This was in the UK, and a police officer, constable, comes by. Somebody called him, and he didn't know how to handle this. He was like, I don't know. Maybe a lawyer. This is not our realm. I don't mm-hmm. know wizard law. And that's a good thing he didn't, because witchcraft was illegal mm-hmm. in the UK at the time. Mm-hmm. So that was another reason for all the mystery and all the secrecy. This was not something that was done malevolently. It was out of survival.
Right. It was all done sub rosa.
Yes, mm-hmm. It was. And Crowley was looking ridiculous. He didn't care what anybody thought. He was going out and dressing in like a golden robe and had the Egyptian headdress, and he looked nuts to British society.
He was a baller of the time.
Yeah, he was. and so that was just his beingness, just his personality, though. Mm-hmm. And so he was the perfect figure to come along in the world of the occult. And occult is a term that came up in around the 1700s. That has not been around very long at all. That is something that has a pejorative label now, but essentially just means hidden. In fact, there is a medical definition for the word occult. And I know in clearing we usually don't get into the technical terms.
Right, but in this case, it's germane.
Yeah. Occult in the medical sense means hard to detect, something that is not of a clear cause. Mm-hmm. So that is relevant. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like that. And like I said, this kind of thing is not hidden in mystery for elitism alone. There is a degree of that, especially now when it doesn't need to be that way, but a lot of people still do, just out of sheer tradition. Mm-hmm. And that's where chaos magic came from and all that. But that's a whole other can of worms, which greatly resembles Scientology, basically distilling all of this down as best as the founder could, and allowing the people to have it, like I was saying before, where some paths think there is only a finite amount of magic, theta, whatever you want to call it, out there. Others think, no, it's infinite. Anyone can do this. Anyone can have this. There doesn't need to be all this woo and secrecy. So that is something that I wanted to make clear as well.
It's all in the words.
Yeah, it is. And it is hard to understand. I might sound like I know a crazy amount about this, but even I'm just like a low-level guy when it comes to this stuff. I'm really not as deep into this as some people are. Mm-hmm. But I know enough about it from comparison, and mm-hmm. that's why this is such a valuable subject. You can learn a lot just from observing patterns.
Right. Comparable magnitudes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So when Crowley left the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and he joined the OTO, which was founded by a man named Roos. I forget his first name, but that was his last name. Justin Roos, I think, was his name. He was at the same time experimenting with other religions and philosophies and trying to develop his own magical system. And it was starting to gain some traction. And one day, some OTO officials came to him and said, "What are you doing telling people about our upper level secrets?" And he said, "I didn't do that. This is stuff I came up with on my own." And they went, oh my God, okay, then you're the guy. And they put him right at the top because his stuff was directly compatible. Some of it was exact for what they'd written. Mm-hmm. And he did that just out of automatic writing, tapping into collective consciousness, all that stuff. He was dipping into the perennialism I was talking about, and he had done it successfully. He had trained himself enough in his eclectic interests that he was able to form a coherent take. And some of it is totally subject to his bias and other weirdnesses that he had and just crazy 2D stuff. Some of that is definitely in there, but he was seen as wise enough, and that is just one layer, like I said. But he was seen as wise enough and in the know to be the head of the OTO, and he was from then on. He brought it to what it was. Mm-hmm.
Took it to the next level.
Yeah, and he focused on what the rest of esotericism is focused on: the power of will, the power of intention, and we'll get to that more in a second. I don't think we talked about meta belief, did we?
No, not yet.
But I would like to. So I hope I don't forget. I don't remember if I've written that down or not, but that is something that needs to be talked about. So before the OTO had founded in 1906, and before Crowley's involvement with the Golden Dawn, 98 and 99 of 1800s, we need to talk about the context of what was happening in Europe, the UK, and the United States at the time within the spike and interest of esotericism. So this was the late 19th, early 20th century. Like
a lot going on.
Yeah, and this is from around the time of the Civil War or right after it to the turn of the century. There was a spike. There was a huge wave, just a boom of people being interested in what else is out there. Mm-hmm. And I can't say esoteric again. I've used it too much. There's no other real term. I think I've used all the synonyms, but all of this arcane stuff, these secret keys to the universe that at least they seem to be, that these metaphysics, people were finally starting to realize there might be something to this because they were getting results. And even people who were just curious were finally ready to go through it because there was a little bit of a counterculture happening at this time.
There was a renaissance of New Ageism in that context.
Right. And New Age, it mostly pulls from Eastern stuff, but esotericism, Western esotericism borrows a lot from Eastern stuff. This is all related. It all comes from a common source, as far as I'm concerned. It seems to. And it always leads you to similar places, even completely independently, just like that story with Crowley. So the stuff that was going on, people were just high-key interested. They wanted to know. They were seekers, and mysticism was having a boom, and this was just the culture of the time. And some people saw it as something that was strictly a pastime because they were bored and they're rich and they didn't have to worry about anything. But even the working class were experimenting and dabbling, and all of these different groups that were springing up were recruiting members like nobody's business. And this is a time when most people are just Christian as hell. And of course, most of these things that were gaining popularity had a Christian base, were modern forms of Christian Gnosticism, where you probably heard the term in New Age, Christ consciousness. That comes from this. That comes from this Gnosticism, Christian Gnosticism, where they believe that Jesus Christ is an idea and what you should strive for in consideration of others, and sort of this Zen way of being. And this was essentially what people were seeking. So that is what was happening. And I want to talk about Helena Blavatsky and all that and what she thought of this. But since we're going in order, next I will get into the fact that the Golden Dawn itself, I might have misspoken, so that it was only around for a couple of years. That was when Crowley was involved, 1898 and 1899. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn itself was around from 1887 to 1903. It was formed in 87 in the midst of all this. Mm-hmm. And they were just dudes, really. I think they had some women, but it like a lot of these, there was a faction of elitism of the boys club sort of thing, and it was popular with rich men. And we can talk about at some point how Freemasonry did not allow black men in for ages, mm-hmm. just for a long time. Neither did Mormonism, the LDS Church. Fundamental LDS people still did not allow black men to be in the priesthood. This is something that you'll see where these organizations are not free of bias, mm-hmm. and eventually these things will change. There's always dubbing.
Right, so the free will only goes so far.
Yeah, like all men are created equal, except
right. Slaves are slaves, and women are women.
Right, and white
these
males
are mutually exclusive ideas.
Yeah, white males over 18 who own property is what they meant.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so there's an interesting thing about that many of the founding fathers sort of, at least they were dilettantes. They dabbled in this sort of thing and really were obsessed with the significance and the symbology and all that. And obviously, like with the Freemasons not letting black dudes in, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn being pin up and elitist, like people kind of get that way, mm-hmm. About religion. When I was listening to the demos on the Pro TR's course, when that guy said he thought that so-and-so didn't think someone deserved a franchise, which was the older term for a mission, that's something that you see, mm-hmm. where people get exclusionist about stuff.
Right, it becomes a good old boy club.
Yeah. It does.
We've seen that throughout history in religion and all the way back.
Yeah, like I don't want to share, that mm-hmm. sort of thing. Somebody doesn't deserve this.
Right.
And that is a problem. Mm-hmm. And that's probably where we got how we are now.
Right.
So the next part I will talk about is someone who was highly influential in the realm of, not just esotericism, not just religion, not just New Age and spirituality. She was influential in pop culture and philosophy and art and thinking and literature. None other than Madame Helena P. Blavatsky, or HPB, as she called herself. And Madame Blavatsky was a Russian noblewoman. She was aristocracy, who rejected that. She hated the aristocratic scene. She hated all that stuff that she was born into. She would even severely injure herself so that she wouldn't have to go to balls. She stuck her foot in a pot of boiling water so she wouldn't have to go dance with the dude. Mm-hmm. By all accounts, she was probably asexual. She never wanted a romantic partner. She smoked 100 cigarettes a day, and she was this crusty old Russian woman, and all she wanted to do was study religion, have phenomena happen, and ride her horses across the uncharted terrain. Mm-hmm. So that was the personality we're dealing with. Again, a maverick, mm-hmm. somebody who was considered to be an extreme outlier of their culture. Mm-hmm. And she was given permission by the arranged husband that she ended up with and her father to go get it out of her system in the New World. Basically, go explore whatever you got to do. Just go do it. Come back though, and she never did. Of course, once she was out there, she had too much fun, and she started her own religious ideology and organizations, and she has influenced everybody from L. Ron Hubbard to Adolf Hitler to David Bowie to Andy Warhol, just anyone you could think of. She has been influential on, and the good, the bad, and the indifferent. She was a major staple of Western and Eastern culture, and she does not get enough credit. And partially to blame is the fact that the Nazi Party was not inclined enough towards deep thought to actually look at what she was saying, and they were kind of taking a strictly eugenics and racially chauvinistic take on the whole thing. Like, you'll hear the word Aryan time and time again. Aryan does not mean what it means now. Aryan it literally meant a old tribe in the North Indian mountains, and they you know how anthropology is. They walked over a whole bunch of places. They went all over the Middle East and into Russia, but this was an anthropological term, and the way she used it was about the knowledge that they had. And she also talked about the Great Flood that had happened. She had talked about Atlantis. She talked about lost continents, lost species. And she says that she talked about transhumanism, and basically describing that humanity can evolve to a next step, but usually it messes itself up right after it does that, and it restarts. She talked about people coming in from other planets. She talked about stuff that nobody was talking about at the time. So she didn't just get this from nowhere either. She spent years, decades, exploring the various hidden religions out there, Eastern and Western. She didn't really have much of a preference. It was kind of half and half. So she went around the occult circles in the United States and the UK and Egypt and Turkey. But she also went to Tibet and to India and that region, seeking knowledge from Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, and more than anything else, I believe, Taoists and Hindus. So she formed her own thing.
She was unbiased.
Yeah. She is the very poster child of syncretism. And she formed the religious philosophy known as Theosophy. And Theosophy, guys, if you think that Scientology is hard to understand, Theosophy is out there. Like, it is really, really cool and really interesting to study, but it takes decades just to actually fully grasp. It's a good 20 years of research to be anywhere close to the top of understanding that. So that's where a lot of this comes from, is pulled from. And on any article you will read about Theosophy, you will read about how she directly influenced Scientology. There are a lot of parallels there. And there are a lot of branches and splinter movements. You might have heard about I Am activity at one point or another. And that was a form of Theosophy adapted for more modern contexts. So this woman was one of the people that I'm talking about. She was she was also imperfect and she was in show business way more than she should have been. She sometimes forged results and that sort of thing. She was imperfect, and that was her undoing as well. So They wrote hit pieces on her too, and constantly tried to debunk her and all that, and did not take into account a point of neutrality for documentation that was not acknowledged. Right. So this is, like I said, this is something that we see a lot.
The common theme.
Yeah, it is. That it's like an attempted destruction of history, even, because there's nobody sitting there just writing stuff down without a bent.
Right.
But that's unfortunate.
It's all a matter of viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. It is. And she came up with this idea of the cosmic masters or the ascended masters, depending on which book you're reading. And this is the same thing. All it means are these people, these figures who have been enlightened enough to change humanity in a spiritual way. And on that, she includes Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, all of these sacred icons. And to her, and depending on which branch of theosophy you follow, they're either angels or just extremely enlightened teachers, or they are people from somewhere else in the universe. And so this is, again, something that you have to look at it through your own lens. And again, it's the number of times over thing. There's no way you can even understand a little bit of theosophy reading Blavatsky's work the first time, or even the second time. You have to have like a key, kind of like having a dictionary, a tech dictionary. Mm-hmm. You have to have something like that to read what she's saying and to understand any of it.
Due to the nomenclature.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, and not just that, she speaks in allegory. And people who don't understand that she's speaking in allegory, well, that's how you get the Nazis. And just like anything else, they use that for manipulation and to brainwash their own people. And they didn't know how to get deeper into it, but they knew they could use it for control. Right. That's what they did.
And here we are again.
Yeah, here we are again. So that's the common theme here. And the next part we should go to is that while all of this is happening, the greater United States culture was not immune from, for lack of a better term, the hysteria of all this at the time. There was something that could loosely be coined as spiritualism that was happening, which were people were doing seances, and this is where the Ouija board comes from. Mm-hmm. People were finally starting to acknowledge that, okay, there are ghosts. There just might be ghosts, and maybe we can communicate with them. And so they were trying. And a lot of this was people trying to cope with death and talk to their loved ones who had passed. Right. And that was understandable. And a lot of them were getting results. There were tappings and things going bump, and just possessions even. There was some of that happening. There was just poltergeists, any of the typical paranormal stuff that you think of was happening. But as far as Blavatsky was concerned, all of this was a byproduct of people who didn't know what they were doing, messing around with the lowest tier of deluded esotericism. Mm-hmm. So that was her opinion on the matter, and there might be some truth to that. There definitely is to the fact that if you don't know what you're doing when you're handling tarot cards or a Ouija board, it is easy to get yourself in a situation you don't want to be in.
Right. So people were becoming aware and more open-minded to spiritual things.
Yes. Yes.
Nearly 70, 80 years prior to Dianetics being released.
Right. And this was something that was just an awakening. And it was totally counter to the way the religious establishment had been talking for a long time. And you don't want to try to cross the spiritual world. You don't want to try to contact the dead. That's necromancy. That's evil. That's of the devil. Again, you'll see that as well. Slander. and trying to tell people, don't. And some of it is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, but they were warning against even believing that it was possible.
Right, to don't look.
Yep. Yeah. Listen, just believe me. Don't observe. Mm-hmm. Believe me.
Something we still see today.
Yes, it is.
Right, don't look behind the curtain.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's just one of those things, and some people argue that is the definition of religion, that it is always doctrine and control and on faith alone, but that is not an adequate definition, because that does not take into account things like Buddhism and stuff where it is hands-on. It is not a passive approach to religion. It is an active one where you're going to get results. Mm-hmm. And that's what all of this stuff we're talking about is, for people, instead of being, I don't know how to put it, submitting to the will of whatever divinity might be out there. Instead, they are going and finding it and doing it and manifesting it.
Right. Free will.
Yep. And so that's what needs to be said about that. Mm-hmm. While all this was happening, mesmerism was something that was still going around. Spiritualism was heavily influenced by mesmerism. And then all this is not just in the United States. It's in the UK and Europe and other parts of the world to a lesser extent as well. And Mesmer, Franz Mesmer, was somebody who basically, he was a scientific figure. A lot of what he created was pseudoscience, but a lot of it was the foundation for hypnotism as we know it today. Mm-hmm. The whole "you're getting sleepy" thing, I mean, that's pretty unrealistic, but what that is based on is mesmerism, which is a very specific type of hypnotism that uses sleepwalking, sort of like these hypnagogic states, almost. Mm-hmm. And, well, here is a quote. The scientific interest in the claims of spiritualism resulted in the development of the field of psychical research. Somnambulism, that is the word for this particular type of hypnotism, also exerted a strong influence on early disciplines of psychology and psychiatry. Interestingly enough, esoteric ideas pervade the work of many early figures in this field, most notably Gustav Jung. Carl Gustav Jung, excuse me. Although with the rise of psychoanalysis and behaviorism in the 20th century, these disciplines distanced themselves from esotericism. Also influenced by artificial somnambulism was the religion of New Thought, also founded by the American mesmerist Phineas P. Quimby, who was alive from 1802 to 1866, which revolved around the concept of, and this might sound familiar, mind over matter, believing that illness and other negative conditions could be cured through the power of belief. And at this point, one should mention or note that LRH talked about both on the briefing course. Mm-hmm. Also, it is noteworthy that this concept of meta-belief comes up time and time again in esoteric religions and newer schools of thought. Mm-hmm. This is essentially the fundamental tenet of high magic, hermeticism, and illusionism.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And this is something even we see in modern spiritual movements. Mm-hmm. I mean, this belief in belief is all that means. That the power of belief is the most powerful tool you have, and that is what changes things. That whether or not there really is some hocus pocus magic stuff going around, there doesn't need to be, because all you're doing when you're doing magic is changing your perception and or somebody else's. Mm-hmm. So that's the power of the mind. And that is, I believe, and as far as I can assess, something that heavily influenced L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels there. And this was back when, in the 1800s, roughly.
This started in the late 1700s, kind of, but like it really took off in the mid, to a degree, the early 1800s, but the mid 1800s, 1820, 1830 is when this really started coming in. You probably heard, about Christian Scientists. I mean, that's where this comes from. This is just, they believed that the power of belief and faith alone could cure them. And that's where a lot of these faith healers have got that. So it doesn't just influence things that are considered to be novel. It also influences Christian sects. It does. And this is, I guess you could call it osmosis. This is how these types of things go.
No, in Scientology, consideration is seen to the physical universe.
Right, exactly.
It's the same thing.
It is. It's exactly the same. And so I really don't know what else there is to say about that, but I do want to note that you'll often hear as a refutation or a protest to Scientology, the belief system even existing, that this kind of thing concerns the mind, or what some may deem hypnotism, has no business in spirituality. But the fact of the matter is, it's been involved in spirituality for hundreds of years in a mainstream way and thousands in a non-mainstream way.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
Well, we're going to call this end of podcast 1 for now. What are we looking at time-wise?
Gosh, let me see. Well, hold on. Yeah, that's pretty long. Since we're already so far in, and this is a long podcast now, kind of twice the length we wanted it to be.
Yeah, a lot of data.
There is. I can probably do the rest of this really quick if you want me to, or we can
let's just hit the greatest hits on it
and get more in depth next time.
Yeah, get more in depth next time.
Yeah,
we got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We're not even halfway done. we're more than halfway done with the outline, but with the whole history.
Right. We got a long way to go.
Got a long way to go. So I'll briefly go over that. We talked about mesmerism and all that. And, I should mention that this was with the crossroads, as with a lot of other practices of mysticism and science. The way Mesmer and his followers saw it, he discovered a revolutionary way to communicate with the spirit world. I mean, like I said, he was doing alchemy and stuff. And a lot of people, either in the Enlightenment or post-Enlightenment era, who were scientists, were messing with alchemy and Western esotericism. To them, this was a science because it was trial and error. And so this was the thought that you could finally communicate in an active, scientific way with spirit beings. Late 1700s and all throughout the 1900s, when that New Thought stuff started up, this included revivalist Pentecostal hysteria, which is the milieu that brought about many of the sects we have today, most notably the LDS Church, but also things that are not as well known, such as the Shakers. But I guess the most mainstream manifestation of that is the concept of laying of hands, which was not always just a religious practice; it was secular as well. And so this is the type of stuff I'm talking about. It just influences the culture, and it permeates. That's just what happens. And even religions that have nothing to do with esotericism and might blatantly disavow it as evil still have practices leaking in, whether they know it or not. So the next bit is that Isaac Newton himself dabbled in alchemy. alchemy was a major practice of esotericists. I mean, at the time, they didn't have any idea what was going on, that chemistry was not a refined science. To them, making something out of another thing was magic. Mm-hmm. And so that may be
science.
Yeah, that may be what is going on today. Mm-hmm. I use the example of cargo cults. Mm-hmm. Why do we use a pejorative term for people who have never seen a boat? They've never seen a boat bigger than a canoe. And this airplane crashes and brings them food and candy they've never tasted before, mm-hmm. and these things they've never seen, and warm jackets.
They're akin to magic.
Yeah, to them, that's magic. To them, that is a gift from the gods.
Right, and all relative.
Yes, and if something like that happened here, who's to say we wouldn't react any differently?
Right. I think we, the balance of the society would.
Yeah, I think so. So, I'll go over this quickly. We can get more in depth into what these things mean next time, but the timeline goes like this, going backwards. Early 1600s, organized Rosicrucianism comes about. The earliest confirmed Masonic documents, this is the next thing, because they're not the same thing, dates to roughly around 1400, but a much earlier and simpler form was practiced in the medieval UK around 930 AD. Masonry, as with other esoteric sects, includes belief in a supreme being and his doctrine. Mm-hmm.
Which we have as the dynamic.
Yes, we do. And this is something that is not unique to Freemasonry. Freemasonry, like anything else, is just another splinter in this religious family tree. Mm-hmm. And that comes up in Rosicrucians, the Lema, Hermeticism, Kabbalah.
Time again.
It comes up, the supreme being is what you see. And I really want to point out that we'll talk about the Kabbalists next time, but when you get into the supreme being stuff, you will find out that they are talking about a transcendent, intangible, omnipresent God that is synonymous with none other but infinity. So these are influences.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does. These are influences that are almost undeniable, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the next bit is that Hermeticism, an ancient form of esotericism that can be traced back to the Egyptians in the turn of the Common Era, however, only experienced a revival in the 1300s, describes a transcendent God, like I said, synonymous with infinity. This is something you see. This is it's just repeating itself.
Thread,
yeah. It's almost ridiculous at this point to even point it out. It seems silly or comical, but here it is.
Right. Well, it would seem that being that much of a common thread, that people were highly in agreement with this.
Yeah, they were. They were, and we'll get into Taoism next time too, because it's a very similar thing there. But this is not just Western. This is not just European. This is global for this type of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's not exhaustively global like every single religion, of course not, but you'll see this type of thing all over the world. Mm-hmm. In every
it's an underlying theme.
Yes, it is. And there's a great book that talks about it. I think it's called the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. And that is a wonderful place to get started. If you're curious about this sort of thing, I should talk about next time more in depth, as above, so below. Mm-hmm. The concept that there are microcosms and macrocosms, also called fractals, that anything that is one way in a microscopic sense, it's that way above in a bigger sense too. Like
a larger arc.
Yeah, it's like, what is the word for it? Pantheism.
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 That's right.
Yeah, where you'll see your veins look like river bends look like lightning strikes. That's as above, so below. Or that, and like we were talking about, the church using its sacred data for evil, just like the Illuminati, just like the Catholic Church, just like a bunch of different things in history, as above, so below.
Yeah, and that also follows in line with the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio. You know,
yes,
hurricanes looking the same thing as tornadoes, looking the same thing as a galaxy, as a leaf, as the stock
brain.
market trends, and the brain, and blood
walnuts,
vessels, and walnuts, and everything. So, you know, these concepts are taken and used in different areas for different things.
Yeah, absolutely true. And we need to get into this more next time. And next time, I want to not dominate the conversation.
No, that's totally fine.
I'm sorry if you feel I've done that. I don't know how else to describe these sort of things, but hemorrhage information about it.
Yeah, well, it's a huge topic, as is Scientology itself, and this is why.
Yeah,
these root causes, these derivatives.
That's exactly correct. It is seen as a negative thing often, like Hubbard stole it, but no. Like I said, if you combine multiple ideas, it becomes a new idea. Just combining ingredients in the kitchen to make a new dish doesn't mean you have violated copyright of somebody's recipe.
Right.
It's a new recipe. So it's that sort of thing. But on the other hand, you'll also hear, well, he just made it up. So it's sort of like you cannot win that argument. Right. You just can't. Right. So either way, we're going to skip back a bit next time. We have to unfortunately grapple with the fact that in the hella dark ages, like the straight dark ages, contrary to popular belief, cults only because of our lack of information on them. They were not well documented. They're in the dark. Just best guesses are all we have. Yeah. We do have some historical events, but we don't know as much about those times as we do others. So there's not a lot there. The Dark Ages, of course, like the modern definition, were dark and crazy suppressive. So you couldn't do things that strayed from the narrative. You couldn't do that back then. You just had to know your place, basically. Sounds familiar. Yeah, it does. But we'll talk about Islamic mysticism. We'll get more in depth in Christian Gnosticism and its outgrowths. I want to talk about Manichaeism and all of that stuff. And oddly enough, how it relates to Scientology. I got a good one there. Sounds interesting. I will mention Kabbalah. We'll get more into perennialism. An old one? Yep. Oh, old as hell. So old we can't date it. And pre-flood societies. We'll talk about all that fun stuff. It's going to sound like my favorite. Oh yeah, it's going to sound like just conspiracies that don't have any base, but there is a lot to support this, and especially today. Yeah, there is. We are constantly finding out information that changes the narrative that has been around in science for a while, and unfortunately, that field is not immune to bias and, how do I put it, like negative intention either. Right. So we'll talk about that and more on the Eastern stuff as well, because that has a huge influence on Scientology, so much so that Scientology is often classified as New Age. So that's it. All right, folks. Well, we really appreciate you listening to our podcast. We're sorry this went on so long. You can visit our website at ao-gp.org. That's the Advanced Order of the Great Plains. You can find everything out about us there, and you can find out about Independent Scientology. For myself, Jonathan Burke. And I'm Eddie Cairo. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.